You need to stop biting me, or else I'm going to kick you out of here. No, no, no. I will pet you if I want to pet you. And on the other end of the spectrum was Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes was a beautiful train wreck. Snake Eyes is essentially the prequel story of the ninja character Snake Eyes from the G.I. Joe stories. And oh boy, was it not good. The problem with that, it's like, the movie starts off and I was like, oh, this could be a good movie. The story's pretty straightforward. They don't really worry too much about beating you over the head with anything. The best thing that I can say about it is the action sequences are incredibly well done. The cinematography has some really great moments in it. The art direction is good. But that script, man, it's bad. There is a lot of stuff in it that just, it's like, this doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why would that character be there? It repeatedly establishes things and then takes them away. Or it's just sloppy. It's worth watching once for some of the really, really great action sequences, some surprisingly good cinematography, and maybe to laugh at how character motivations, change on a dime. But yeah, it was not good. But it is just, oh man, that one, it was disappointing. And I didn't have high expectations. I just thought, it's like, yeah, it looked like a fun movie. And it is a fun movie. It's just also really badly written. So, yeah, not a big recommendation for Snake Eyes. Next on the list is CandyMan. A sequel, sort of, to the previous film trilogy, although they pretty much ignore the second two in favor of the first one. CandyMan was really good, and I really liked it. There's really not a whole lot to say. My only thing with that movie was that there was a lot more that they could have done within the story. Like, there were a bunch of times where I called stuff where I was being like, oh, this is going to happen now. And then it just didn't, and it felt like a lot of wasted opportunities in it. That being said, the main performances are all good. It is creepy. It is atmospheric. How they handled the all of the kills was really, really interesting. It's less outright scary and more just like, it's in an atmosphere movie. It has an atmosphere of fear built into it that I really, really liked. And the way they tied it together with the other movies was really, really interesting. I liked that one a lot. There's really not a whole lot to say. CandyMan was great. Highly recommended. Ooh, The Night House. Another one where it's like, I don't outright recommend it. If you're in the mood for a moody horror film, you can check it out. It's a movie that took too long to come together. It had some, like, the overall, like, the story in and of itself is good. The problem with it is that it took too long to execute on it. The mystery wasn't well paced. The Night House revolves around a woman whose husband has recently died. You find out very quickly he died by suicide, and there are questions about why he did it. Like, it didn't make sense why that he would do it or why. She then proceeds to slowly find out a bunch of stuff about him and herself that she didn't realize, and in the process also finds out a bunch of things that he was hiding, including a house that was built on the same lake as their house, but with an exact opposite floor plan. And then things get supernatural and weird from there. The problem is that it takes 2/3 of the movie to get to the stuff that's really interesting and for the story to really come together. It felt like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be a character piece or if it wanted to be a supernatural thriller. And it kind of ended up too much character piece and not enough supernatural thriller. Because once they get to the point where you find out what's really going on, it runs to the end after that. But it's worth a watch if you like moody, character-driven supernatural horror. It's good, but it doesn't go, and didn't go exactly where I thought it was going to go. It's like, I don't want to say much more than that because it might be spoilery. It didn't go where I thought it was going to go because it went in the most obvious direction once you hit a certain point. It's like Like it's hard to explain, but it's worth a watch. I do give it a soft recommendation. The Night House. Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, I think is what it is. Shang-Chi, once again featuring Awkwafina, who is, as I said before, is quickly becoming one of my favorite actresses. Shang-Chi was great. It's definitely one of the better Marvel movies to come out recently. Very different stylistically from a lot of the other ones, which was nice. The storyline was a little bit kind of exactly what you expected. It didn't really go anywhere that was particularly surprising, but it just did everything that it did incredibly well. The action sequences are some of the best action that the series has seen in a long time. The fight choreography was great. The art direction was great. It's just a very, very fun Marvel movie. You know, there are some writing and theme around, you know, loss and how people deal with loss and how people mourn, but overall it's more of just an excuse to get some more representation and to have some really, really great action sequences. And it delivered on that. It was just fun. Big recommendation, especially when compared to some of the other Marvel movies that came out in the last couple of years. It was solid. I really, really enjoyed Shang-Chi. Not really much to say beyond that. Good movie. Blue Bayou. Oh, okay. So Blue Bayou is the story of a young man who is arrested and due to be deported because it turns out that his mother brought him into the country illegally when he was a baby. He was adopted by another family, but that family never processed his adoption properly, so he is currently in danger of getting deported. It is a character study about this young man dealing with the fact that he might be deported. Another very good emotional gut-wrencher. The main performances are all great. In particular, the main character's relationship with his adopted daughter is very adorable and leads to one of the most gut-wrenching scenes of the year at the end. And then it also revolves around his relationship with his partner, and then his partner's ex, who is the actual father of the girl in question, as well as a cop that he finds himself on the other side of the law from because he's got a history of crime in the form mostly of car theft. Overall, it's very good. It's a lot of the notes you would expect, but it is well directed. The performances are great. It's beautiful. It's heart-wrenching. It's kind of what you expect from an indie movie. I only have a couple of real complaints. It just never did anything new or special for me. But so if you're into that kind of movie, you're gonna know exactly what you're gonna get from it. The only real complaints I have is that the police officer ex-boyfriend, his partner is cartoonishly bad. He is a caricature of a bad cop to the point where it's it took me completely out of the movie. It was so unrealistic when the rest of the movie is so naturalistic and real. It was just this doesn't work. And the only other major complaint I have is that at certain times of the movie, it abandoned the story in favor of connecting it to the moral and connecting it to real life events. Specifically, the ending leaves on a really, really sad note. It then leads into some comparisons to real life events for good reason, and it just felt like the movie got cut weird at the end in favor of that. It just didn't totally work for the movie as I was watching it. But still, very good, well shot, a lot of great natural light, good stories, great performances, still a good recommendation for me. Just didn't quite do anything that really elevated it beyond any other indie drama that I saw this year. Next on the list is Dear Evan Hansen, and that movie was a train wreck. I'm over exaggerating. Dear Evan Hansen was fine. The problems that the movie has, I'd say there's a million reviews that all say more than I could right now, As a musical, the music is good, even if the songs all kind of feel very samey. So with Dear Evan Hansen, like most musicals, you have to rate it on a few different things. It's like, I believe this was also done by the same people who wrote The Greatest Showman. And The Greatest Showman for me was like, as a musical, it's fine. As a movie, it's good. As a P.T. Barnum story, it's bad. So kind of rating it on a similar thing. As a musical, Dear Evan Hansen is good. The music, you know, it hits the notes, it gets in your head, but it is very samey. There aren't really any standout songs though, so it's fine to good as a musical. As a movie, doesn't totally work. The performances are all solid, even if some of them don't really make sense. Particularly, our lead playing Evan Hansen. Yes, I know he originated the role, but he is clearly too old for the role. It so often took me out of it. That and his performance was so over the top sometimes that it felt weird. That and the way they handled the musical to movie transition didn't really work either. It was like they were trying to force a musical into a standard teen coming of age story mold, if that makes sense, as far as that kind of the way those movies are shot and presented. It just didn't work. It wasn't bad, it just didn't work. That and there are other things people say about how there are other moral implications to how Evan does all this horrible things and never really gets his real comeuppance and other stuff like that, but I think that's pretty minor overall. It just wasn't. It didn't make the transition from musical to movie very well at all. Even if there were some really, really great sequences in it, it wasn't bad. It just didn't work. So you can honestly pass on Dear Evan Hansen. Ooh, another big one, or another weird one. Titane. I also kind of want to do another individual video on this, but Titane's a weird one. For sure. I think the best review I saw of it was a friend of mine said, "So I just saw Titane, and that film was very French." The basic plot structure is it is about a woman who was in an accident when she was a little girl, which put a plate in her head that apparently also affected her brain in various ways, and is now apparently sexually attracted to cars, which leads to her both due to the effects on her brain and feeling out of place. She's trying a bunch of stuff to feel something, which leads to her having sex with a car, which is very odd and artfully done, but just like weird. There's no real explanation of it. You just have to accept it, and is actually impregnated by said car. So she also commits a series of crimes that lead her on the run from the police. So in order to get away from it, she disguises herself as a missing boy so she can hide by living with the father of the boy, who is an aging firefighter dealing with feelings of inadequacy and having a hard time dealing with growing old. Meanwhile, the car baby is growing within her at an alarming rate, and so she's having a harder and harder time disguising that fact. It's a weird movie. It's another one that I can't outright recommend because it is such a weird movie. All I will say is that the easiest way to take it is an interesting character study of looking at two people who are trying to find their place in the world in the form of these two, the young woman and the older man. He's dealing with feeling old and inadequate and like he's losing his purpose, and she doesn't know where she fits in the world at all and is finding it by living as this guy's son. Also while dealing with an unplanned pregnancy. As far as if I don't personally, there are a lot of conversations as to whether the car is supposed to be, the having sex with cars is supposed to be a metaphor for anything. I don't think it's a metaphor as much as it is just a simile. It's, what if a character was dealing with hiding while also being pregnant, but what if it was way more messed up because it's a car baby? For me, it just feels like it was just a layer to add some body horror stuff on top of it, which there is some legit body horror stuff in there. Viewer discretion bigly advised. But personally, I liked it a lot. I think that the basic story that they're telling is good. It just has a big old layer of French weirdness on top of it. I really enjoyed Titane. Can't outright recommend it, but if any of that stuff sounds interesting to you, just give it a shot, accept everything as it's happening, and just enjoy the character study for what it is. Next, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. The second in the Tom Hardy Venom movies. For me personally, I look at it as this movie was just as good as the last one, but for completely different reasons. The first Venom missed the mark because it wasn't super well shot. It was a little bit too dark at times, like physically dark, and the character work wasn't totally there. Some elements of the story felt glossed over, but overall it was a good story, just not as well executed as it could have been. And this movie feels like the exact opposite. Alright, so where were we? Yeah, so my if there's a judder there, it's because my camera simultaneously ran out of battery. Thank you, cats, who all decided that they need to come and help me film today. My camera simultaneously ran out of battery and out of storage on my memory card at the same time. So here we are, new day, same shirt, because I'm a professional. Back to the list, where did I leave off? So as I said before, it had all of the opposite problems of the original Venom movie. The original Venom movie had a really strong storyline, but kind of muddy visuals and a little bit too dour. It wasn't fun enough. The problem with the new one is that it's much more interesting visually. The plot moves at a much higher rate. Hi, Penny. This is Penny. She's helping me review, and Torch is apparently helping with my cinematography because he's rubbing against my tripod. Buddy. So Let There Be Carnage, the issue is that the characters aren't as well drawn. They all kind of come off as a little bit two-dimensional, even the characters that they were trying to put a little bit more effort into. And while it was much funnier, it was much more better written on that end, it got to be too much. The interplay between Venom and Eddie Brock got to be too silly, and it kind of took away from other stuff that was going on in it. So it's still good. It's good on the same level that the last Venom movie was still good. They're both between a 7 and 8 out of 10, depending on, how you feel. But it's good. It definitely is worth watching, and the ending and the post-credit scenes both play into things that are going to be happening soon in the MCU, though they do address it in another movie that I'm going to be talking about, No Way Home, which I'll try to stay away from spoilers from that, but it didn't do what I wanted it to do, so I'll get to that later. So anyway, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, also good, fun time. Next up we have Dune. Boy, do I have opinions on Dune. And most of them are that it was very good. Dune is probably the best adaptation that we have gotten so far. People have opinions about some of the other ones, and maybe I'll do a longer review of that at some point, but I only have a couple of major complaints, the biggest one being the planet never felt hot. Everybody keeps saying it's like, if you're out here for a little bit of time, you'll die in the heat, and then nothing in the movie ever, visually shows that. The other major complaint that I have is that the Baron Harkonnen was underdeveloped. The Harkonnens in general were underdeveloped and never felt like a threat. That there were a few things that were left out that I feel like would have given more fleshing out to the storyline from the book, but the movie was already 2.5 hours long, and they really only covered the first 2/5 of the book, which tells you everything you need to know about doing the book. But that being said, almost everything else I like. I like a lot of the changes. I like that they gave Duncan more to do. I like the changes they made to Liet Kynes' character. I think the casting was great. I think the cinematography was amazing. I think the art direction was perfect. Just very good. And it's been nice to also hear people, going into this, dense, very surreal sci-fi movie and project and being like, I loved it, who haven't read the book, who have nothing else to say about it, which makes me happy because it means we'll get more. So, long story short, Dune is great. Eternals. Eternals was incredibly disappointing. It's definitely one of the weakest Marvel movies in general. There's another video I kind of want to talk about comparing it to some other films on why I feel like it was bad. And the biggest reason is that I feel like the script was unfocused. Most of the things that people complain about the movie, I don't necessarily agree with. Some of the people didn't like the performances, or they think the art direction, it looks very, oh, go get it. Go find him. Or they feel like the art direction is very bland and the cinematography is washed out, which for me I actually really liked, because the director, Chloe Zhao, chose to shoot it entirely in natural light, which is why it has a very different feel from most of the Marvel films, which I actually liked that they tried something different, which is why I was excited for it. And then I watch it, and the plot is all over the place. It's really unfocused, and the plot doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially with other things that are established in the universe. It requires a lot of retconning to make work, and the villains are all underdeveloped. While I liked the general idea of the, what were the villains called? See, that's the thing. I can't even remember what they're called because they were so underdeveloped. The Deviants. Yeah, so the Deviants were really underdeveloped, and then the big reveal that happens halfway through is pretty good. It's just, like I said, it's so much, there's so many things going on, and each character has their own story arc, and those story arcs don't play into the main plot as well as they could. It just came off as a big mess of a movie. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't good. For the pedigree behind it, because I love Chloe Zhao's other movies that I've seen, for the pedigree behind it, it is just aggressively mediocre. It does not live up to its promise, especially with the cast and the director and everything else. It missed the mark as much as you could. It has some interesting things that might move forward, but with how poorly it was received, I can't see the Eternals being a big part of the MCU moving forward, other than as side characters. Next is Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is simultaneously one of the movies that I enjoyed the most and hated the most at the same time. They had so many of the right ideas, and a lot of it got lost in nostalgia. There are a bunch of sequences that are just there to reference the old movie. Like, the plot is essentially the exact same as the first movie. If you boil it down, all of the elements are the exact same, other than it's now a bunch of kids doing what's going on instead of the adults. It was still very fun. The new characters were great. I wouldn't mind seeing another sequel in this universe. The same way I wouldn't have minded seeing another sequel in the female-led Ghostbusters either. I thought that movie was fine. I think it was maligned more than it deserved. It wasn't great, but it was fun. It was funny. Like, I'd watch another one. Same thing with this one. I liked what they were trying to do. Like, I liked what they were doing with it. There were some sequences that were just straight up just there to mine for nostalgia. And ultimately it took away from the plot that they were trying to tell. Like, all the new characters were fun. I liked the storyline that they began with, talking about Egon and what happened to him, and then dealing with, you know, the kids and her mom. And then so much of the story ended up being just, like I said, just ended up being a rehash, to the point where it's like, it's literally the same villain as the first movie. And that's not a spoiler. It happens very quickly, where they make sure that you know that's the case. But there was a bunch of stuff that they reference that there's no point in referencing to the original, and it just gets bogged down in nostalgia instead of focusing on the new characters. And even some of the new characters are literally just rehashes of other characters. Instead of Slimer, you have Muncher, who is very similar to Slimer, but he eats metal instead of food. Like, that's literally the only difference. But that being said, I love the new characters. It was funny. The cast is great, top to bottom, and I would like to see more. I would genuinely like to see what they would do with those characters moving forward, and giving them their own story. The big problem with a lot of the Ghostbusters stuff after 2 is that a lot of it just is telling the same stories over and over again. And it's like, you're talking about hello again, Penny. You're talking about a world that's very, very broad. You're really talking about fantasy. You can do whatever you want, and it just keeps coming back to Ivo Shandor and Zool in so many of the projects. Like, even the video game. The video game was great, but it was the same thing. So That, like I said, it's funny, it's fun, it's generally well shot. Some of the new stuff they do is really cool. Some of the additions to the Ghostbusters tool set is really good. I enjoyed that aspect of it. But the story just did not come together in a way that didn't feel like it was shortchanging the kid stories in favor of telling more nostalgia-based stuff. That and how they brought back the original characters felt really shoehorned and weird, other than the speech that Dan Aykroyd's character gives in the middle, which, once again, not a big spoiler. Everyone was expecting it. But yeah, Ghostbusters, it's good. It's just not great. It's, like I said, the good parts I loved, and the bad parts I really, really hated. But I enjoyed it. Okay, next up is Free Guy. Free Guy was a pleasant surprise. I was expecting this movie to be fun, but it is genuinely very, very good. Free Guy revolves around two main plots. One revolving around Ryan Reynolds' character, who is an NPC within a game, who, after he meets a player character, inexplicably falls in love with her and slowly becomes self-aware and starts playing as the good guy within the game, stopping all the bad guys who are the players. The other storyline revolving around said player character, who turns out to be a programmer who is trying to investigate the game from the inside out to prove that her code was stolen to create said game. And then slowly but surely their stories come together and you find out more and more about the game and both characters and how it was made, and as Guy's influence starts to change the characters within the game world. There's really only one major negative, and that is, despite being inside of a game, it really doesn't work the way a game works a lot of the time. They take some big creative liberties with how programming works and how you interact with video games. That, and there's some inconsistencies. So there's a point early on where the player character gets kissed by Guy within the game, and then somebody says, there's not even a button for that. And then, later in the movie, she does the same thing to Guy. So how did that happen? There are little inconsistencies like that, and also just with, in general, how this game actually works doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Other than that, though, it's very well acted, it's incredibly funny, it's good-natured, it just is a lot of fun, and there are some pretty solid twists. The character interactions, both within the game world and out of the game world, are great. I really just can't recommend it enough. If I had one other minor complaint, there's some product placement that feels really out of place due to the production company that made the movie. It's from Disney. You'll know what I mean when you get there. But other than that, it's just so much fun, and I could not recommend it more.
And side 2.